welcome back to History Class with Dr. W and our continuing discussion of American cultural history. In this, our final lecture, introducing American culture in the years prior to the Civil War, we'll focus on culture in the rising cities, particularly among the working and lower classes within those bustling and growing cities. Realities in the growing cities often belie the myth of domesticity. In immigrant districts surrounding grim factories, men indulged in a bachelor subculture in their leisure hours. The center of such activity was the saloon, which in most cities could be found on every city block. Here, men engaged in drinking and storytelling, playing card and other saloon games such as darts or bowling. In the bowels of these saloons could be found all manner of illicit activities, from boxing matches and animal fights to seeking companionship with prostitutes. Women were generally unwelcome in these bachelor hubs, other than to entertain as waitresses, dancers, or prostitutes. We'll discuss this urban bachelor subculture more later in the course. Only slightly more respectable was the working class theater, a rowdy and raucous place alongside the saloons. Here, early versions of vaudeville-style entertainers plied their trade. Crowded and small stages might see magicians, joke-tellers, mimes, strongmen, animal acts, and dancing ladies, among others. Acts that didn't please the crowd might be pelted with rotten fruit or other objects. The worst might be booed off the stage or even forcibly removed. This was no place for Shakespearean plays or opera. It was bawdy fare for a rowdy crowd. Such places also became venues for political debate and discussion. In the increasingly egalitarian political atmosphere of the Jacksonian age, politics itself became a pastime. Local candidates might make speeches in the saloons or theaters, or paste their broadsides on the door. Patrons debated the issues and candidates of the day. Loud arguments, lubricated by the freely flowing liquor, often ended in fisticuffs or brawls. In some districts, controlled by the growing and powerful political machines, arm twisters and leg breakers of the local strongmen patrolled these establishments to ensure that voters toed the line. At times, stepping out of line at the polls could put one in physical peril. The Bowery Theater in Lower Manhattan, pictured here, not far from the shipyards and amidst a diverse, largely immigrant, working-class neighborhood, was the hub of the nightlife described above. In these lowbrow theaters as well, minstrelsy was born. It was at the Bowery Theater in 1832 that the popular actor Thomas Dartmouth Rice deployed a new act. Painting his face black with burnt cork, he danced around the stage, singing "Jump Jim Crow." While the exact inspiration for this act is subject for debate, the most common theory is that he borrowed the act from some slaves that he saw dancing. The performance was so popular that he developed other acts in blackface, and the Minstrel Show was born. Minstrelsy was rooted in deep-seated racism and relied upon gross stereotypes and tropes. Characters such as the Mammy or Sambo became common figures in the performances, and minstrelsy swept the nation in the antebellum years. Also appealing to the working masses were new newspapers, known as the penny press, who geared their content and writing to the working class rather than educated elites. The first major paper in this category was the New York Sun, founded in 1833 by Benjamin Day. Day reduced the size and length of traditional papers and scoured police reports for salacious stories. A bit like the tabloid media of today, his stories relied on gossip, innuendo, and poor behavior. Papers like The Sun thrived on sensational stories, such as the murder of Helen Jewett, a New York prostitute found murdered on April 10, 1836, and the subsequent trial of 19-year-old Richard Robinson, who was arrested for the murder. The trial became a spectacle, drawing huge crowds, howling for Robinson's conviction on one side, or his release on the other. Stories like the Jewett story were rocket fuel for papers like The Sun. Selling for only 1 cent, the paper found broad appeal with the working class readership, which grew to more than 40,000 by 1840. For their part, elites sought to maintain a culture that separated and distinguished them from the ribald culture of the lower class. The crown jewel of upper-class New York theater was the Astor Place Opera House, opened in 1847 and home to only the most proper, staid, elitist entertainment. The Astor Place Opera House was the scene of one of the most notorious class clashes in American history. The backdrop of this clash was a rivalry between two of the top drawing actors of the era, Edwin Forrest, the leading actor of the working class theater, and William Charles Macready, a British actor best known for his Shakespearean roles and the epitome of upper crust snobbery. The two sniped at each other in the New York papers, leading working class fans of Forrest to heckle Macready during his performances, even at one point throwing rotten fruit and vegetables at him in a performance at the Astor Place Theater. Planning to return to England, Macready returned for one last bonanza performance at Astor Place on May 10, 1849. Hearing of his command performance, a mob of Forrest's fans stormed the theater, throwing rocks and threatening the patrons, a packed house of some 1,800. The local militia arrived on the scene and fired into the mob. Eventually, 22 were killed and some 50 more were injured. The Astor Place riot of 1849 brings out into the open the class distinctions that cut across American culture in the mid-19th century. The working class also found a hero in Phineas T Barnum. Born into a wealthy Connecticut family, Barnum found himself drawn to the exhilarating, unpredictable fun of the working class saloons and theaters in Lower Manhattan, developing a disdain for the snobbish and dull entertainment of the wealthy. In 1825, Barnum decided to join the rabble of lower-class entertainers. Among his first acts was a woman named Joyce Heth, whom Barnum declared was 161 years old and had been a nursemaid to George Washington. The act was pure hokum, of course, but fans were drawn to it, and Heth presented a convincing and charismatic figure. From there, Barnum developed other acts, and eventually purchased the American Museum in New York for $15,000 in 1841. You see a picture of it here. There he created a museum for the working masses, the farthest thing from the quiet and boring art and history museums of the elite. Akin to the Ripley's franchise of today, Barnum charged just 25 cents admission, and his vast and growing emporium offered a combination of live animals, curiosities from around the world, weaponry and armor, and various artifacts. Most controversial and alluring, some exhibits in the museum involved human subjects, such as the infamous bearded lady. By modern standards, many of these acts would be considered hopelessly offensive and politically incorrect. At the time, though, they combined showmanship and huckstery with an element of mystery and uncertainty. The most notorious exhibit featured a disabled African-American man named William Johnson, whom Barnum cloaked in furs in an exhibit he titled, "What is it? A man? A monkey? Something in between?" With Darwin's Origin of Species still very much a subject of debate, this exhibit fed into spectators' curiosity on the subject. Barnum was also at the forefront of a growing movement towards national spectacle and mass events, as he assembled some of his acts and took them on the railroads to cities around the country. Barnum and his innovation, and the beginnings of entertainment reaching the whole country, point us toward the next era in American culture. The lectures to follow will develop more fully a number of the topics, ideas, and themes discussed in this preliminary lecture. But they also point to a new era and the mass spectacle growing more common in the Gilded Age. It is there that we turn in our next